We are now heading to the Channel Islands, which are found off the northwest coast of France, so they're closer to France than to England. We visit the Casquets first. The Channel Islands. The islands are not part of the United Kingdom or the European Union, but are possessions of the British Crown, with independent administrations. The inhabitants are, however, British citizens. The Casquets is a rock island, isn't it?
Well, it's not an island. Well, it's quite a large rock, actually, with quite a lot of dwellings there. At one time, Casquets apparently was families used to live there, and one family called Hugay was well known as the family that even had their children living there with them. It's quite a famous rock. The one of the victories, HMS Victory, was lost there. The one in Portsmouth Harbour, as far as I remember, is Victory 5. Victory 4 was lost on the Casquets in about 1744. With it's supposed to be about 1,100 lives lost on that ship. And then there was a railway steamer, the Stella, was lost there. Quite a loss of life. It was quite a large station. Of course, you had 3 towers there, and one with the light, one with the fog signal, one with the radio beacon, you know.
I remember Cowes Depot ringing up and saying, "Oh, you've been appointed to the Casquets in the Channel Islands. You'd better go over there." I said, "Well, it isn't, the relief isn't." Oh, he said, "But you've got to live over there, because in those days you had to go and live where the lighthouse was." I said, "I can't live in the Channel Islands." "Oh, well, you know, if you don't live over there, you know, to pay all your own fares, etc., etc., which, you know, from London, where I was living, or in Essex in those days, to the Channel Islands was it was all of £5 a fare. So I remember it was about £5, 6 shillings or something on the ship, plus your rail fare down to Weymouth or Southampton. So it wasn't very, from our point of view, it wasn't very satisfactory. Anyhow, again, you were duty bound to go, and I went over to Guernsey, so from Southampton, and then from Guernsey to Alderney, and that's one of the roughest crossings I think I've ever been on. That stretch of water between Guernsey and Alderney, for someone who's not a particularly good sailor, was, to say the least of it, trying. And I met Nick Allen, who was then the boatman for Casquets. And I spent a very happy week off over there, waiting to go off, and getting to know people. And it was marvellous. The island was barely coming back from being occupied during the war, and Alderney was one of the few Channel Islands where everybody had been taken off. It was rather sinister, because there had been a lot of slave labour over there, and I'm afraid of some of the excesses that had been committed against them. They had more or less had a free run of the island, the Germans. So some of the locals were just beginning to drift back, and it was marvellous, because if you wanted anything in the shop and they were having their dinner, they said, "Well, go and help yourself, leave the money on the till." Nothing was ever locked up, and it was probably the way that life used to be in this country, probably at the turn of the century. You went back 100 years. It was very, very drab and run down. Nothing had been painted for the war years, and I can always remember those cobbled streets in St Anne's, the village. It was very, very run down and very, very sparse. There was a tremendous atmosphere of optimism. Anyway, I went over to the Casquets. Harry Hall was the PK, Harold Hall. Daddy Hall, as he became known later, because his wife always used to call him Daddy. Leslie Blondin, who was a local man, was the other AK. Norman from Sark. Norman Wackley, who was the same age as me. He was the other SAK that used to come relieving. He joined the Channel Island Lighthouse service as 2 or 3 of them did. And Norman was the one that lasted longest. He hasn't retired a little bit after me, I rather fancy. And I'd done 18 months on the Casquets, which was very interesting because that had been run by the Germans during the war and had been mined, so there were parts of the island where the rock where they didn't want you to go. There had been 2 commando raids off on the Casquets during the war. It had been used as a detention camp, as I said. And I think it was a man called Bonnie Newton and a Major Appleyard, I think, of the Royal Marines. They prior to Dieppe, they used to go over to the Channel Islands purely to have some sort of training exercise. Presumably, they used to do bizarre things like go and leave the day's copy of the Sunday Times in the German commandant's letterbox. Ridiculous things like that, but I suppose it was a good exercise. Anyhow, they decided one time they would raid the Casquets, as they'd done several times, so they took the whole damn lot of them off, took them all prisoners and brought them back to England. And after that, the Germans, they sort of fortified the place. They knocked the wall down at the top, they put a damn great Spandau machine gun in. And if you look at the landing post on the Casquets, if it's still there, it was absolutely riddled with bullet holes where they used to use it as presumably for target practice. And there was a pom-pom on the engine room roof, which we tipped over and laid there for years afterwards. A big graph on the wall outside the kitchen, or the living quarters. It had 1 aeroplane, so I presume they must have shot an aeroplane down, and hundreds of seagulls. Significance perhaps I'm not going into, but the thing I got a photograph of somewhere was a big German naval ensign with Sieg Heil painted on the engine room walls. I've got a photograph of that somewhere. Okay, the Germans also they always used to write their names in paint on the rocks, and the whole of the island would daub with Germans' names, and presumably, although I can't read German, I was told it was places things like "never again" and "this is the end of the world." They obviously weren't very impressed with the Casquets, although from a lighthouse keeper's point of view, it was one of the best rocks I think I've ever been on, because it was big and it was interesting, and you had your own room and it had a bathroom, I remember, which is almost unheard of on the. It took the war for the Germans to put a bathroom onto a British lighthouse, which was up to pre-war, of course, had never been heard. In fact, even when we were first married, over the first couple of stations we had never had a bathroom.